these things must be observed is significant because we're told by science, by physics, that if a particle is unobserved, then it exists in a probability distribution wave state, a superposition state of all possible properties. And this probability distribution is actually distributed across the entire universe. And so it's only when a particle is detected by a conscious observer that it takes on fixed properties. And in that moment, then it is localizable. So prior to being observed, the particle has a probability of being located if you look in any space in the given universe. And so your probability of finding the particle, if you look here, might be 0.001%. And if you look over here, the probability might be 0.02%. Over here, it might be 3%. But over the entire universe, that's where the probability of finding the particle, if you look in any given point, really, that's the spread of the probability distribution wave. And so it's only for observed things that the concept of space even makes any kind of sense, because space is a relative concept that we apply to distinguish the distance between things in a way that's meaningful to us as conscious creatures. But that space isn't real. That distance between objects, it's not actually real, because prior to our observation, it doesn't exist. The probability distribution wave of both objects overlap. And so there is no distance between them. There's no space between any unobserved objects, because every particle in our universe has a probability distribution wave covering the entirety of the universe. And so each object's probability distribution wave will overlap with the probability distribution wave of every other unobserved particle in the entire universe. And so there is no space between unobserved objects. There's no space. There is no reality that corresponds to that concept, to that label that human beings apply to an observation that only conscious creatures make, but that isn't actually necessarily real. And we know from physics that particles that manifest and take on fixed properties and a set location, they do slip back into superposition states. And so if you observe a thing and then you leave it, after some time, it will go back into a superposition state. That's what we know about particles, and things are made up of particles. And so it's not enough to observe, let's say, another solar system. And if there's no conscious life in that solar system, then your observation of that solar system effectively brings it into manifestation, into reality, makes it real for all intents and purposes. It gives it tangible reality. But if you then die and nobody else observes that solar system for millennia, then somewhere along the way, and the time is unspecified, we're not really sure yet how long it takes for particles to slip back into their superposition state, because when we check, we observe them, and as soon as you observe them, then they take on set properties. And so at some point, that solar system that you had observed will slip back into a probability distribution wave of various properties and location information. And so the distance that you had measured between yourself and that solar system becomes wrong, becomes meaningless, because that solar system will then revert back to a probability distribution wave that is spread out throughout the universe. And so it effectively is everywhere. There's a probability of locating it at every single point in space. And so the distance measured is invalid because it no longer applies, because you could just as easily say, well, the distance between me and that solar system that is now in a superposition state that has reverted back to a probability distribution wave, what is the distance between me and it? Well, there's a point right in front of you that has a portion of that probability distribution wave, and it may just be 0.000000000 ad absurdum 1%, but that's still a probability of finding the solar system in that location if you were to look there. And so it just, there's no meaning to the concept of distance, of space. There's no reality to it. It's a false human construct, and it's useful, and we use it because it makes our navigation through reality easier, and it reflects how we experience reality in the world around us, but it's not truth. I'm not saying this is necessarily what I believe. I'm saying this is what follows from science today, as it's given to us, as it's published, as it's understood by scientists, physicists. If you believe in science, then this is what you must believe, because this is what science says is true. This is how science explains the world. This is the theory of how things work. And if you believe in what science tells us, then this is part of that story that you buy into. If you buy into space-time, if you buy into particle physics. If you're not really understanding what I'm trying to say, here's an analogy. So in a video game, your character can go from the little village where you're, I don't know, interacting with the merchant and the lovely village ladies, and then your character can go into the forest to fight and slay the dragons. Is that what happens in video games these days? I don't know. I don't play video games, but let's just pretend. Let's just go with that. Okay, so the distance between the village and the forest exists for your character when you're playing the game. So your little character, you have to move your little avatar, and he has to go outside of the village, down the little hill, into the forest to slay the dragons. But there's no real distance between the village and the forest. The distance is not real. You can't, it's just coded into the program, but it's when you stop playing the video game, when you turn off your computer, the village is no longer manifest and far from the forest. They are both just code that exists in your computer, and they're described, but their actual location is actually on the hard drive. If you think about it that way, they're actually right beside each other, depending on where they are on the disk. But the point is that they're not 20 kilometers apart, even though your little avatar might have to travel 20 kilometers within the game. But it's not a real distance. And you could put in an option in your video game to say, okay, if the player presses this magic door, he is immediately transported to the forest. Why can we do that in a video game? Because the distance doesn't really exist. There really is no distance between the village and the forest. So you can have the avatar touch the magic door and it becomes a portal and zap, now he's in the forest. Because there's no real distance between the village and the forest. Do you see? I hope you see. And so that's that. Good night.